arcade versus simulation. We're going to discuss the pros and cons of each and which one I prefer. And then I want you to tell me which one you prefer. Let's get into it. All right, according to Microsoft Bing, an arcade game, not just wrestling game, focuses on providing an unrealistic and fun experience, allowing players to do things that they couldn't do in the real world. And then for simulation games, it says provide a more realistic and authentic representation of the real world gameplay with authentic physics and realistic effects. Now, a lot of the people that comment on my videos, shout outs to you guys, thank you for doing that. I always enjoy reading your comments. When I talk about like AEW or any other wrestling game that has failed, like Battlegrounds, there's always a comment or two about how it should have been more simulation. And it got me thinking, it's like the masses really likes the simulation aspect, but I feel like if there's some sort of way to meet in the middle where we have the cool, fun arcade gameplay, but then have all the simulation depth, like the modes, like the universe mode, like MyGM, the showcase. If we can somehow meet in the middle, then I think everybody would be happy. Like the 2K series, the gameplay is, they try to go the simulation route, but it feels arcadey. So it's kind of like it doesn't know which direction it wants to go. It's trying to do both, but I feel like it doesn't succeed at either one. Like, in my opinion, like there's so many controls and so many different things to remember in the 2K series that I feel like the simplicity of an arcade game would really help it, but also be a detriment because a lot of the fans want that super hyper realism. Like a good example would be SmackDown vs. Raw 2007, where they added in the joystick controls of where you can position the wrestler, you can carry him around the ring before you body slam him. You had full control over some of the moves. I thought we were going to get an evolution of that, but we kind of went backwards with the arcade feel. So we have like a little bit of that controlling, and then the arcade with the countering and all that stuff. I feel like they need to toss out the gameplay and either go full arcade, full simulation, or just kind of rework it into this new hybrid that's not so cumbersome to play, if that makes sense. So anyway, I wanted to go over the pros and cons of both arcade style and simulation style, and then come to the conclusion of which one I prefer. Because, to be honest, beforehand, I kind of was leaning towards arcade, but after making this list up of pros and cons, I can't tell if I like simulation or arcade better. So anyway, let's go through this. So the pros for arcade-style wrestling games are typically the gameplay is more fun. That's subjective, but to me, overall, I think the masses would agree that gameplay is more fun. Number two, the creation parts can go absolutely crazy. We can have robot parts, vampire parts, monster parts, anything, because there's no limitations to, having the real world representation. You can go nuts with it. Number three, they can include body morphing if they want to, because again, it doesn't matter how crazy they look. It's an arcade style wrestling game. They're not going for the realism, so they can get away with a giant head and tiny legs or whatever. It's, again, an arcade wrestling game. Number four, you can see impossible wrestling moves, like in Battlegrounds and in All-Stars, where I think in All-Stars you can literally punch them so much that they bounce off the ground and then grab them as they bounce off the ground and do like a combo and stuff. That was so fun, beating the crap out of some of the wrestlers and just having them bounce off the ground. That would never work in real wrestling unless you were on a trampoline or something. But you can do like a 4,000 splash where you spin around a zillion times before you hit the ground and then get up right away. You could jump off of the top of a building if you wanted to, like in Rumbleverse, where you can elbow drop off of a building and you get up and you're fine. So you can't do that in real life. So arcade style wrestling games allow those crazy moments, and that's what I love about the arcade style. Number five, the art style. Now this is a double pro and con, but this is the pro part. So the art style can be whatever it wants to be. So we can get those awesome, cool characters like in All Stars. I love those designs, by the way. I kind of wish they had some females in there because I was curious. I want to see what they would look like in that art style. But I really like the All Stars art style. Not a big fan of the Battlegrounds art style, but I don't hate it either. So yeah, the art style could be whatever they want it to be because it doesn't have to represent realism that's on TV. Number 6. Typically in arcade-style wrestling games, the controls are easier to learn because our arcade-style wrestling games kind of go for the casual crowd versus the hardcore crowd that likes the simulation games. So the arcade-style wrestling game controls are more accessible to the masses. So that's a pro in my book. Number 7. Since the games don't have so much going on with all the different modes and all the different little nuances to the gameplay, typically the online is much better in arcade-style wrestling games. And that's a bummer because the 2K series, they need to get their head out of their butts when it comes to online because online is terrible. Number 8, you can have the men fight the women because it's more of like a fighting game that way and everybody's on a level playing ground. So you could have Zelina Vega beat up the Big Show if you wanted to, or Andre the Giant. It doesn't matter. It's an arcade-style wrestling game. That's the beauty of it. Now, the cons of an arcade-style wrestling game. Again, the art style. Not always what everybody likes. Like, Battlegrounds was okay. I don't hate it. But All-Stars was much better. I like All-Stars because they look like superheroes. They look like comic book characters. In Battlegrounds, they kind of look like the little Muscleman toys back from the 80s. They were kind of like chibi looking. They're kind of weird. Some of them look good. Some of them look terrible. That's where the art style can be a con. In an arcade-style wrestling game, the modes are usually lacking because they have to like recreate it for those games. See, the simulation games are this like basically building off of this last year's game so they can get to a point where they have a universe. And my GM, Showcase, My Rise, all that stuff. Typically when they make an arcade wrestling game, it's a one and done. So unless they add it with DLC, you're only going to get so many modes and so many match types because they have to recreate it specifically for that one game. And unfortunately, the money or the time and investment isn't worth it for the developer. So typically in an arcade wrestling game, we get less modes. It's like All Stars didn't have a universe mode, didn't have a GM mode, didn't really have a story mode. I mean, it had I want to say like a tower mode where it had some cutscenes, but it wasn't like a full-on story mode. So that's a drawback in arcade wrestling games, which kind of sucks. If they could somehow meet in the middle and have a universe mode in these type of games, holy crap, I would play these arcade wrestling games forever. Typically because of the lack of modes and match types, the arcade wrestling games tend to die off a little faster than your typical simulation wrestling game. Even though the simulation ones come out every single year, there is a ton of stuff to do in those games. The arcade style ones are just like the recent Dragon Ball game. The Dragon Ball Sparking Zero lost 90% of its player base in less than a month because the casuals don't sit there and play online forever. They go through the story mode, they go play a couple matches, have fun with their friends, and then they're done. That's it. And that, unfortunately, is what happens to arcade wrestling games. And that's probably why they don't really make them anymore. Another con of arcade style wrestling games is that the CPU in the later levels can be absolutely brutal. Like if you try to play All Stars on the hardest difficulty, some of the wrestlers are so broken that you just lose every time. So you have to like I remember Macho Man, his elbow drop was like magnetic and would go to wherever your opponent was. Like you couldn't run away from it, you couldn't get away from it. No matter what, you were going to take that elbow drop. And I lost a lot of matches from that online. Like they have to work on the balance of that kind of stuff. So those are the cons that I've written down for arcade style wrestling games. Feel free to post your pros and cons of arcade style and simulation. Now we're going to go over to the simulation style wrestling game pros. Here's the pros list. Number 1, there's a ton of match types because they're trying to include everything that you see on TV. There's always a ton of modes. We're talking Showcase, My Faction, My Faction, My Rise, Universe, My GM, the Creation Suite. There's always something to do in the simulation style wrestling games because there's so many modes in these games. The graphics, if you're a graphics person, it always looks super good, photorealistic. Like 2K has really outdone themselves with the last couple games. It's one of the things they've actually done well is the graphics department and recapturing what you see on TV. The character models, number 4, look absolutely stunning. Like some of the wrestlers, especially the DLC ones, like this WCW pack, holy crap, some of the wrestlers like Mr. Perfect, they look perfect, no pun intended, but they did a really good job with scanning these wrestlers into these games. You get authentic music, so you get the actual full entrances and music and everything. They're not cut off, kind of like unfortunately in AEW where you get a 10-second entrance. That was one of the downfalls of that game. But yeah, in a simulation wrestling game, you get their authentic entrance, their authentic music, and it really tries to replicate what you see on TV, which is really, really cool. Because it's like, holy crap, this game looks like I'm watching the show. So that's a pro in the sim game category. Now on to the cons of simulation wrestling games. Sorry, I sound like I'm repeating myself here. All right, the cons to me would be gameplay has to be realistic, so no fun stuff like crazy finishers or creation parts. So you know how you can, it was it where they had create a move and you could make these outrageous finishing moves with it. I think one of the reasons they removed it is because it took away from the simulation aspect of the game, and also that probably broke the hell out of the game's code because it's like these moves are absolutely insane. Imagine if they had that create a move feature now with mods and everything. There'd be some pretty crazy moves out there. But yeah, so unfortunately it has to represent what's on TV, so that kind of limits the gameplay and what you can do. Number 2, realism. Everything in the game has to be limited to what you can act, like I just said, what they can actually do on TV and what you see on TV. Number 3, everything feels kind of robotic in nature, meaning you have to wait for certain move animations to begin and end before you go on to the next action. Because they're going for that realism, they want the move to look like it's supposed to on TV. So what I'm talking about is in the 2K series, when you go do like your finisher or certain big style moves or strong moves, grapples, you can't interrupt it or you can't stop it. It has to go through the animation before you can go to the next thing, which causes a lot of whiffing of the air or missed grapple attempts, especially when they're trying to get off the ground. And the computer knows exactly when to initiate the grapple to grapple you when you're getting up. They know the animation frame timing, and it's so annoying. And it's been like that for years, and even before the current developers, Visual Concepts, took over. Number 4, another con to me is there's no fake or bizarre characters, like no robots, no vampires, no squid people. It's always has to be in the realm of realism because it's a simulation of what's on TV. So we never get no crazy zany creation parts, no crazy zany characters. They tried to with 2K20, which I loved, and that brought me back to the franchise, but a lot of people didn't like that. I love that stuff. I want a whole game like that, but the masses, unfortunately, has spoken and does not like that stuff. So you guys really don't like the Frankenstrowman or the Swamp Thing Bray Wyatt or the actual Demon Finn Balor. You guys just don't like that stuff, and I don't know why. It's so cool. Anyway, I don't know. Number 5, the story mode has to be told like it's a real wrestling show. Like we're looking at My Rise, right? Where it has to be like very boring, where you're doing backstage politics to get matches and stuff like that. Now, obviously, there's kayfabe and stuff in the game, so they don't really, talk about stuff like real wrestlers talk about, because we all know that it's predetermined and they're all friends in the back. Well, not all of them, because some of them hate each other's guts, but you know what I mean. So you don't really get that cool out there storylines that it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because it's within the it has to be within the realm of possibility of wrestling, if that makes any sense, without breaking kayfabe. However, 2K20, if you played through that story mode, the writing was awful, but they did do some crazy stuff in there, like going to another dimension where the Undertaker was at. There's so many weird crap you do in that. Ugh, that game, it was terrible, but it was also fun at the same time. So anyway, these are just some things that I have listed that I could think of off the top of my head of the pros and cons of arcade versus simulation style. Typically, I would say I like the arcade style better just for gameplay, but when you really sit down and think about it, simulation is the way to go because there's more to do. Now, I wish there was a way that we could do like a hybrid of both. Like we get all the modes and features and stuff of a simulation game, but we get that really awesome over-the-top gameplay of an arcade game. If we can somehow meet in the middle of, let's say, an All-Stars and a 2K, I haven't unopened because I bought it digitally, then that would, to me, would be the perfect wrestling game. With all the creation parts and everything, some sort of fusion of these two games would really be the perfect wrestling game, to me. That's what I want. Sound with comments below, which do you prefer, simulation or arcade? Or do you kind of like the mix that 2K is trying to do, but not really doing that great at it? Yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching, and stay frosty.